Xi Jinping and President Biden. Arguably, as I said, the most important meeting in the entire world. So let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen just to preview everyone for what exactly is happening. Well, there's actually a lot going on behind the scenes, Ryan, where the APEC meeting, which is obviously the Asian Pacific Cooperation Organization, they're all coming together. There's 18 different nations, but the two figures that everybody wants to see are Biden and Xi. And the biggest thing that is actually dividing the Biden administration and the Chinese right now is the lack of military to military communication. These were really important channels that happen for deconfliction purposes with all the U.S. forces, not only in the South China Sea, but all across the Asia Pacific. And it really basically amounts to, they're like, hey, we're going to do an exercise over here, so don't shoot at us. That's it. It sounds stupid, but this is very basic but important military to military stuff that's supposed to go, beyond the diplomacy and just make sure no accidents. They had cut off that channel after the shooting down of the Chinese spy balloon back in February. So they have resumed some of that. The other thing that's going to happen is that at the APEC conference, and actually stands for Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. I apologize for missaying it earlier. The point, though, is that the economic piece of this is actually really key. There was a presumption that some trade agreements and other things may be announced that doesn't yet appear to have materialized into anything formal. Of course, there's going to be a lot of discussion around Taiwan, but the big thing that overlays all of this is that China is probably coming into this position both in the weakest economic picture that they've ever had, and also the strongest military. So they have the strongest military that they've ever had, and they've got all these ambitions, they have all these things that they want. And then at the same time, the Chinese dream and all that people had been talking about for over 20 years now that kind of belies the every US-China meeting, that's not the same. China's economic slump right now is probably one of the biggest news. They have a huge real estate bubble. Their overall consumption and economy is really hurting. Zero COVID really hurt them badly. They've had problems restarting manufacturing. They have real energy problems as well with coal, and even they had rolling blackouts for a time across the country. Kind of shook the foundation of the CCP's control over it. And then at the same time, you've got Xi, who is probably the most dictatorial Chinese premier since Mao Zedong. And combining all of that, you have this meeting between these two great superpowers and their leaders, and how long it's going to be. What exactly are they going to, can they accomplish anything? There's been a lot of pre-work and all of that behind the scenes, but I'm curious if you want to flag anything that in particular they're going to get into.
Well, it feels to me like they're going through a period similar to ours. We had the post-World War II era up through the 70s. Every generation felt like the next generation was going to do better. Like that was and you can even run it back before with the blip and the Depression. That kind of produced the American dream, to go back to your point about the Chinese dream.
Yes.
That was the thing that allowed so many people to accept a lot of the indignities that come with contemporary life. That, okay, this sucks, but things are better for me than they were for my parents, and I'm going to make them better for my kids than they were for yours. And what we learned between the 1980s and the financial crisis of 2008 is that when you pull that rug out from under people, the indignities that they're suffering start to sting a lot more, and they start to get pretty frustrated. And you saw this populist anger that was channeled to the right as a result of all that. And I think you just have to be seeing some of that in China at the same time, because you're finally seeing every generation felt like their children were going to do better, because the CCP, to its great credit, has overseen the greatest collapse in poverty, right?
Well, I think America's trade policies had a lot more to do with that than the CCP. But I guess you can't blame them for taking advantage of stupid people.
We did trade policies in South and Central America. We did trade policies in Africa. We did trade policies in Vietnam, and it's China that's kicking everybody's butt.
Yes, they were the best equipped to take advantage of U.S. stupidity. The thing that I would really say is The economic piece to this is pretty much baked in at this point. This is one you can't deny with Trump. I mean, the trade war is probably the single most bipartisan accomplishment that he had. He destroyed at least the public trade consensus. Behind the scenes, there's many Republicans and Democrats who want to return, but there's no announcement coming in this meeting of, oh, we're going to get rid of the 301 tariffs, the national security tariffs. There's no way that even Biden, could try and do something like that. At best, they could only try and, bring back TPP through another name. But even from what we've seen so far, that's not really what's going to happen. I think Taiwan and military is going to dominate probably the entire conversation, which is why it's interesting, because the other thing that's been really rankling the Chinese is that our relations with China have basically had nothing to do with China recently. Everything has been about, oh, China's supporting Russia in Ukraine. Oh, China refuses to condemn what's going on in Gaza. And it's like, well, okay, but maybe we should just talk about US and China,
Right.
which has to do with Asia and our largest trading partner outside of Canada and Mexico. And how are we going to figure this out? And what are our actual red lines in the region? And is cooperation even possible? What can, all these things look like? It's by my biggest critique of the Biden administration's foreign policy is that they refuse to conduct foreign policy on its face for U.S. interests and then whichever country that we're dealing with. Our relations with India really took a massive beating over Ukraine because they continue to buy Russian oil. And it's like, what the hell does it have to do with U.S. and India relations? This is the largest now population on planet Earth. Maybe we should just talk about what the two of us have in common. And so with China, I think very much so, it's been to their benefit, actually. The more that U.S. relations and everything is distracted on Gaza and on Ukraine, the less time you're spending on Taiwan, which, by the way, is a country that actually matters to the U.S. economy. I believe it's number 6 in terms of our global trading partner. And arguably, in terms of high tech and all of that, the single most important trading partner that the United States has. So that's going to be interesting. Also, behind the scenes, just wanted to preview for everybody what Xi actually says in Chinese whenever he thinks that we're not listening. Let's go and put this up there on the screen. They point out, behind public assurances, Xi Jinping has spread, quote, grim views of the U.S. Speeches by the Chinese leader show how he was bracing for intensifying rivalry with the United States from very early on in his rule. And who wants to guess, Ryan, who the chief cheerleader for relations with Xi will be fine? And actually, he's a cool guy and we can get along. Is Joe Biden. Biden, I remember this. I remember the very last speech he gave as vice president, the last policy speech, and he still uses it to this day, although it's less cogent. And he's like, nobody has spent more time with Xi Jinping than me.
Yeah.
I've sat across the table from him. I've looked him in the eye and all this stuff. This is a man you can work with. And that was the line for so many years from Biden. Obviously, that just ludicrous on its face. But I still think he does cling to that vision of before times, pre-Trump times that the Chinese desperately want to return to. So as we said, there's just a lot there's a lot headed into this meeting. Of course, there's going to be ramifications on Ukraine. There's going to be ramifications on Gaza and all of that. But the single question is how are we going to conduct relations between our two states? Yeah. What is our military red lines and others? What is going to be communicated by President Biden directly to Xi's face? And then how the hell can we even continue to trade and coexist in this world as we move forward?
And what Xi has said, semi-privately, and it's funny what counts. We're so out of the loop when it comes to China that it's funny what counts as private, because it's these speeches given to hundreds of people. Yes, sometimes even millions. But he gives them in Chinese, so they're secret. One of his themes is that he does not trust the United States because he thinks the United States is trying to undermine other powers throughout the world.
Right.
That he believes, as the Times puts it, that he agrees with Putin on that the U.S. likes to orchestrate quote unquote color revolutions around the world, and one reason that he believes that is because we do like to do that. And it also puts into context the kind of Uyghur genocide, the cultural genocide that he carried out in the western part of China. He suspected, and not completely unfairly, that the U.S. Is constantly playing games in that region, that is constantly fueling. One thing that we do is we like to fuel little tiny insurgencies to destabilize our rivals, just to destabilize them, and that's been one of our tricks that's been one of the cards that we've played for decades. And so he sees that and he's like, you know what? just going to no such thing as Uyghurs anymore.
This is my thing with China, is I just think that the best thing that they've got against us is they're like, oh, you guys talk about democracy. And I've had, one of my old professors in graduate school, this guy spent a lot of time in Taiwan. He was even, I won't go into too much of his background because I'm not sure exactly whether it's classified or not. But the point is that he spent a lot of time across the table from very, very senior people in China. And we would ask him about it. And he was like, it really hit home to me how big of a mistake Iraq was, because we would say, hey, you guys should let up on free speech. And he said, how much free speech do they have in Iraq? And then we would say, oh, you guys should do this. And they're like, well, we don't want to hear about democracy promotion from the people who took over Iraq. And then we would be like, hey, can you get Kim Jong-un to relax? And they would say, well, you guys, he's not going to listen to you because you killed Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. And it was the regurgitation from their point.
Especially.
The Gaddafi thing was a massive.
Because he gave up his weapons
and
of mass destruction.
They bring that up
and then
every
a year
time.
or two later.
He's like, why would we trust you? You took him, you literally bombed him, and he had a rod shoved up his ass because he gave up his nukes. He's like, you think we're going to give up our nukes? You think we're even going to take you seriously after you've done something like that? Never. And they literally laugh at America's face. And part of the thing is, and I've always advocated for on this show, everybody knows I'm basically like a realist, and that is a pejorative term in many cases, but I mean it in terms of like the international relations case of, look, it's like China, you're our biggest trading partner. Taiwan is the single most probably important country outside of Canada and Mexico to the U.S. economy. That's why we care about it. Nobody cares about democracy. We have a lot of non-democratic allies all across the world. What are we doing here? And you're threatening our allies, South Korea and Japan, two vital countries to the U.S. economy under the U.S. nuclear umbrella with tens of thousands of American troops that are there and deep cultural and economic ties between us. They deeply matter to us. They can't stand you. You want to take them over. You have all hated each other for the last 2,000 years, and we're finding ourselves in the middle of this. When you talk like that, I think we can all be honest. Then we can really we can actually say, like, here's why we care, here's what we want, and all that. But for decades, American foreign policy has been all about, like even trade liberalization with China. It was never honest that it would just make big business and corporations rich. They're like, oh, we're going to make sure that, that we're going to have a thriving middle class in China that believes in democracy. And then the opposite happened. It's just been ridiculous. The net effect has actually been importing Chinese autocracy to America, where big business cares about what the CCP thinks, as opposed to a more democratic China. It's just been a ridiculous policy, I think.
And that's before you even get to our number one buddy, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Exactly,
a
and that's
literal
what they
kingdom.
think. They know. That's why they laugh at us. And honestly, they should laugh whenever people are so naive to talk this way.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.